after months of dreading these, we finally know what the unknown changes are, and somehow they're not too bad and also kinda terrible at the same time. To go over the most basic unknown change that they've announced is the quality of life improvement that they're going to add a power gauge for the teleport cooldown and hallucination spawn time. This was a pretty obvious change. I felt like the writing was on the wall for this coming to the game after Dracula was released with 2 separate power gauges, so it just made sense that Unknown gets this. It's not going to change his strength at all, but it's going to make playing Unknown a little bit nicer, especially for beginner players, so that's a perfect change in my opinion. However, this next change is the opposite of a perfect change. This movement speed, depending on the numbers, obviously we haven't been able to play this yet, so we don't know for sure, but depending on how soon this movement speed penalty kicks in while you're using the UVX, this could potentially make Unknown not only a lot weaker, but a lot more miserable to play. So what they've announced is that now when you start using your power, the full movement speed penalty that you get while you're holding out the UVX is going to kick in sooner. The reasoning for this is in the second paragraph here, where they directly talk about edging and faking your power. And I understand that these are potentially problematic parts of the character, and I'm fine with getting rid of them or nerfing them in some way, because personally, I don't like faking. I think faking is just weird. It feels a lot like old Slinger, and they made it very clear they didn't want that anymore, and then they added it back to Unknown, which was strange. And honestly, I thought faking was just kind of lame, and I never did it. That being said, edging was kind of skill expressive, but honestly, most of the time, it was kind of a noob trap where you just start edging for too long, and it was already kind of balanced out by the fact that, yeah, you can edge and have complete control over your hallucination, but while you're doing so, you are permanently delaying your next hallucination spawn. If you edge for 10-15 seconds, that's almost half your next hallucination that you've just wasted the time of. And there's only so much time in a match, and you waste a lot of time getting that perfect positioning, especially for cross-map webs. That's why I typically recommend that you don't do it for more than like 5 seconds or so. And that's why I'm okay with, them making some kind of change to edging and faking, but that's not all that this change does. What this change does is it makes it to where anytime you use your power, you're going to get slowed. Even if you're going for a regular shot, around a pallet, at a loop, going for an orbital, whatever it is, you're going to get into position slower. This is going to be most notable when you're trying to round a corner when you pull up your UVX, which is something you should typically be trying to do when you're trying to hit a survivor in a loop, is you should be pulling up your UVX as you round the corner, so that way you can immediately react and fire wherever they are. This is going to make it to where it's a lot harder to do that, and it's going to be a lot slower, and it's going to be overall just a weaker thing to do. And I don't like that. One of the big things about Unknown is they're a projectile killer that doesn't really feel slow. They're very fast-paced, they're very aggressive. Yeah, you can play them territorially, but most of the time when you're playing Unknown, you're playing fast, you're playing aggressive, you're shooting something out every 7 seconds, you never have to reload, etc, etc. And that's what people like about this character. So anything that slows down the Unknown is something we need to be really cautious of. I've thought about it a bit, and at first I wasn't really sure what else they could do, and I was kind of okay with the change because like, how else, what could you do it? But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, why not just make a fatigue system? First time you pull out your UVX, you don't get slowed down at all. Second time, you don't get slowed down much either, but after the third or fourth time, you do start getting slowed down, and it starts building up and stacking up to where pretty much the second you tap the button, you start getting slowed down on like the 10th pullout or whatever. And the way that you reset this is by shooting the UVX. That way, people who are actively shooting their UVX, even if they're missing, right? They don't have to hit a survivor, just firing out the UVX resets this kind of fatigue. I think that would be the best way to do that. That way it still gives them a couple chances. If you pull out your power and the survivor rounds the corner, it's not too punishing. Obviously, I think they'd have to very fine tweak the numbers. This is a rough, idea of how I would do this instead. So let's say 4 times. After the 4th time, that's when you start getting slowed down. That way, once again, it accomplishes the goal of making it to where you can't constantly fake and you can't constantly edge, but you aren't punished for using your power normally. Shooting your shots, and if you're going for shots and you're just playing the character how behavior intends to, it's not going to affect you much, but this fatigue will affect those that just kind of fake the power every time. Because I have played against 1 or 2 Unknowns who do that, and that's really disappointing, especially considering how fun Unknown can be when they are actually going for shots. Like how fun it can be to play and how fun it can be to play against. I would really much rather see this fatigue system than what they've done now. All right, on to the next change. This change is a fine change. It's not going to do anything. The next change that they did is they increased the teleport recovery speed by 15%. This is after you teleport, you're going to recover 15%. It's like almost a third of blurry photo base kit, which is not enough. I don't know if this isn't common knowledge, but the reason that blurry photo is used so heavily is, one, it feels good, but two, blurry photo fundamentally changes how you play with hallucinations. The best example I can think of is way back when Demogorgon first released. Their shred didn't break palettes. There was an add-on that made it to where you could break palettes, and everybody ran that add-on. So they added that to the base kit. That's what they need to do with blurry photo. Not just a little bit of blurry photo, it needs to be the whole thing and make blurry photo the add-on to something else. And the reason for that is because with blurry photo, your hallucination goes from just a nice like quality of life teleport across the map to an active anti-loop tool similar to a hag trap or a dredge remnant. However, unlike those other two, one, Unknown can't do this at every loop unless they are hitting a lot of survivors with their other power, in which case it is a reward for playing well with the character. And if they aren't hitting with their power often, they can only drop new hallucination every 45 seconds, and typically there can only be one at a loop. So there is still ways for the survivor to play around it, and that's completely ignoring anything that a coordinated group can do to try and use these hallucinations against you when you're trying to use them and chase at a tile. So hallucination and using blurry photos for anti-loop, there were things you could do. Don't get me wrong, it was a strong thing to do, but it wasn't something that could be done often. Teleporting had a 25-second cooldown by default. It has a 25-second cooldown by default. And hallucinations, if you don't hit anyone, takes 45 seconds by default to spawn the next one. So even if they make blurry photo base kit, just the entire thing, all 50%, it's not going to be some overpowered anti-loop. It's still going to take a long time, and it's going to be something that isn't really done a whole lot. So I don't know why they're trying to just do half and half. I get that they did that with, I believe it was the Knight and a couple other killers, and it worked out really well. This is not the case. This is not the time where it's going to do that, because this 15%, it's not going to make people switch out blurry photo at any time, because the people who are using blurry photo are using it for that extra benefit of being able to use your hallucinations as an anti-loop tool. 15% isn't going to allow that in most loops. Shack, for example, you can already barely hit the survivor in a lot of situations with the 50% from blurry photo, so this 15% not going to matter. Where this 15% is going to matter is when people aren't running blurry photo, obviously. But the problem with that is most people who are even remotely serious about playing the Unknown or just have a general idea of what they're doing, the only time they don't run blurry photo, at least from my experience, is when they're running Vanishing Box and Eerie Film. And that is not a build that we need to be buffing, because I think that is Unknown at its worst in terms of interactivity and how fun it is to play against them, and honestly as them. Because you get all these add-ons that do your job for you, and now they're buffing that. I would much rather see blurry photo get completely changed. They make the 50% blurry photo base kit, and then from there, they get rid of Eerie Film. And to their credit, they did nerf Vanishing Box. And Vanishing Box change is something, depending on the numbers, because we don't have exact numbers right now, right? Depending on the numbers, the Vanishing Box change is either going to be very minor or just an absolute like shotgun to the knee for the add-on. What they did to Vanishing Box, let me be clear on this, they made it to where Vanishing Box will now increase how long it takes for you to spawn a hallucination. And if it's less than 10 seconds, it's not going to be a major difference. But if it's 15 seconds or more, it's going to be a massive downside. And the reason for this is every single time that Vanishing Box activates and it infects a survivor who's on a gen, or weakens a survivor who's on the gen, you get 10 seconds to your next power, unless you're already at the point where you're about to molt. And the reason for this is because anytime a survivor gets weakened, you gain those 10 seconds. And what this nerf does, if it's a 10-second nerf, is it basically offsets that, which is fine. You know, most games, the gens are going to be popping pretty quickly, especially if you're not running a bunch of slowdown. So this isn't going to affect it too much. However, this downside will come into effect in only one or two scenarios. One, if it's a 3-gen scenario or where survivors are stealthing it out, it is going to feel bad not getting as many hallucinations. But this is also kind of a double-edged sword, because if the survivors themselves aren't cleansing hallucinations, you get to keep your good hallucinations for longer without having to edge, and that's why I'm okay with this change, right, for the most part. The other thing that I do like about this change is it actually makes it to where survivors who properly play around Vanishing Box, by getting a survivor down to like just 1% of being weakened, to where they can just look at the killer at any time and immediately break out, and then using that survivor, who is essentially 99 to their breakout, to pop the generators so that nobody else gets weakened, they are going to be rewarded because they're going to make this increased hallucination spawn time. They're going to take away what offsets that. So it is going to feel more rewarding as a survivor to do that. And hopefully more survivors, because of this, will learn how to do that. And they will be rewarded more for doing that. And I think that is a good change personally. That being said, this all comes down to the numbers. It's also going to make endgame a lot harder as the unknown if you don't already have shedlings close enough to the gates. But at the same time, that's also something you can kind of prepare for if it's looking like you're going to get into an endgame state, whether it be near the last gen, or you're about to hook the final survivor, or the second to final survivor. Whatever it may be, it is going to affect endgame a bit, and I felt that was worth mentioning, but once again, endgame typically, at least in my matches, is the shortest part of the match. Either all the survivors get out, or you find the last survivor and kill them pretty quickly, or you get into chase with them, which at that point, you've got all the time in the world. So overall, I'm glad that they're trying to do something to Vanishing Box that isn't just a flat rework to it. Really, this change, in my opinion of it, are going to purely depend on how long this is. If it's 5 seconds, perfectly fine change. If it's 10 seconds, a little rough, but still manageable. If it's 15 plus, I don't know if I'd recommend using Vanishing anymore unless you really struggle with your power. Either way, it's going to make the add-on a lot less beginner-friendly, which I kind of don't like, because Vanishing Box was the beginner-friendly add-on that I thought was, even if it was really strong, it was really beginner-friendly, and in the hands of a beginner, I don't think Vanishing Box was much of a problem. It was really only when players stacked it with something like Eerie Film to once again get that ultimate pub stomper build that I really didn't care for it. There's also one final change that they made that doesn't really clarify much, and they said that they improved the visual and audio feedback when using the UVX. Further down, they didn't really clarify it much, but they said something about trying to make it better for new players, but honestly, I feel like it was pretty intuitive for most new players, so we'll have to see how that turns out. So that's the actual direct unknown changes. But there are a couple things that are really worth noting that benefit unknown massively. So if this speed change doesn't go live, or they implement the fatigue system, this is going to be overall a net positive to the unknown, even with the blurry box nerf. And the reason that I say that is because these perk changes are crazy. The number one that I want to talk about is Zanshin tactics. If you don't know by now what Zanshin is going to do, because it seems like everybody's talking about this, anytime a survivor is within 6 meters of a dropped pallet within 16 meters of you, the survivor will have their aura revealed for 10 seconds. Anytime a survivor drops a pallet with you even remotely nearby, you get their aura for 10 seconds. And if they leave the loop and come back, guess what? That's another 10 seconds because there's not a cooldown. I don't think there should be a cooldown on this perk, let me be absolutely clear. I think this is a really interesting perk and much better than the original Zanshin tactics, and I really want to see how this goes. But it's going to be incredibly strong on characters like Nurse and even Unknown, who can play around a lot of pallets. This is going to be a lot of fun to use. It's going to be, I think it's going to be an A or S tier perk on Unknown, and I'm really looking forward to trying this once the PTP goes out. But another one that I'm very excited for, because there's another perk that was already really good on Unknown that got mega buffed, and that is Thwack. Thwack was already an incredible perk. I was using it in my 50 games of Irie challenge, because I didn't want to use a meta build, so I picked like 4 perks that I thought were like good but not super crazy. Okay, well I picked 3 kind of off meta perks and then Friends to the End, because it's Friends to the End. Anyways, off topic. Thwack was one of those perks, and even in its quote-unquote bad state, Thwack was an incredible perk on the Unknown, because it gives you aura reading, and it gives you those screams, and it gives it to you in chase. The only problem was potentially you could waste stacks, because it didn't store stacks, it only reactivated if it was deactivated when you hooked a survivor. Well, now, not only does it do its normal effect of making all survivors within 24 meters of you whenever you kick a pallet or breakable wall scream and reveal their aura for a couple seconds, now, not only do you start the game with 3 tokens, you can gain tokens anytime you hook a survivor. So it's the exact same perk, except for now, not only do you start with it active, you get more overall uses, and you no longer waste uses of it. Thwack is going to be an incredible perk. I am a bit concerned that they might have removed the aura reading just because of some weird stuff with the wording, so we'll have to see. But if they did keep the aura reading and the scream, it's going to pop off. This is going to be an incredible perk. This is going to be an S tier perk on Unknown easily, which is crazy to say, but it was already like an A or B tier perk, so it makes sense that a buff this massive would take it to S tier. Another perk worth mentioning is Predator. It's crazy that Zanshin Tactics, Thwack, and Predator are all becoming top tier perks with this update. But you know, that's the kind of craziness that I love. I like it when behavior makes these big changes to bad perks, because that way, even if it's busted, we still get something fun to play with for a couple weeks before it gets emergency nerfed, right? I don't know if that's a bad mindset, but honestly, I'd rather see this than see like some minor numbers tweak for most of the perks. Anyways, what Predator does now is anytime a survivor escapes chase with you, you see their aura for 6 seconds, and then the perk goes on cooldown for like 40 seconds. This doesn't sound that great until you remember how easy it is to escape a chase in this game while you're still getting chased. For example, on Larry's, if you get hit as a survivor and you turn the corner from the killer, by the time the killer sees you again, you've lost chase and it restarts. And on Unknown, in general, this is going to be really good because Unknown can hit you, lose line of sight, get your aura, and then by the time that the chase mechanic realizes that the survivor quote-unquote escaped, your UVX is going to be basically off cooldown, meaning you can go for some crazy shot on them and down them, and potentially on how you play it, they might have no idea that that's what you're going for. So I'm very excited for this. I think it's going to be the worst out of the 3 perks that I've covered, but I think Predator is still going to be very good, and I'm going to be experimenting with it a lot. And finally, we've got one other thing that we need to mention. Everyone, say hallelujah, because Distortion is dead. What they did to Distortion, if you don't know, it's somehow, because everybody's been losing their mind over this, Distortion now, to put it very simply, 1 token, that's it. It blocks 1 aura for 12 seconds, so that's a minor buff, is that the aura and no scratch marks lasts 12 seconds instead of 10 now. But once it activates, it deactivates, and the only way you can reactivate it is by entering a chase with the killer. This isn't how I would have changed Distortion, and I think Distortion is still going to see a lot of usage because there is so little competition for it, but playing against Distortion is going to feel so much better now, especially if you're doing Sharknown. Sharknown stonks through the roof with all these crazy new aura perks too. Do it. Play Sharknown if you haven't. Anyways, Distortion in general, even when you're just playing, you know, normal aura builds, this nerf is going to make playing aura builds feel so much more consistent. And a lot of people don't like that, but my counter argument to that is if I can't run aura perks, right, I'm going to bring the next best thing, which is gen slowdown, because aura perks let me constantly be in a chase, and they let me constantly do things in a chase. And the game is naturally fast that way, either by me winning and killing the survivors, or the survivors doing all the gens and leaving. If I don't have my aura perks and I'm constantly getting distortions, I will switch to a build that has a lot more slowdown focus, and the games will get significantly longer because of things like Pop Goes the Weasel, Pain Res, Ruin, what have you. And a lot of killers share this sentiment with me. So I think overall this is a good change. I am worried that we will see a bunch of people, you know, like tethered to their Shadow Step boon now, and that's going to suck for both killer and survivor, because survivors are going to have a useless teammate who's too scared to do anything, and killers aren't going to be able to find that person until they get rid of the boon, and they can and if that person just hides it out, they can just replace the boon, and it's going to be a very annoying game of whack-a-mole. So I would have liked to see more aura blocking perks added before Distortion gets absolutely gutted, but I mean, hey, we're here, let's celebrate. Let's not look a gift horse in the mouth too much, and let's have some fun, hopefully. One other survivor perk I do want to mention is Quick Gambit. This is a perk that has me very, very slightly concerned. I don't think it'll be a problem, but it's kind of on my radar as something that could be a problem, where what they did to Quick Gambit, for those of you that don't know, it used to give survivors or within a limited range around you a pretty big repair speed bonus while you were in chase. But now what it does is it shows you the auras of all survivors. It shows you the aura of all survivors while you are being chased, and it has a global range with a smaller number. My main concern with this is just in the early game. This could potentially make the early game even harder for some killers that have to spend a long time in their first chase, like Nemesis. This could potentially really hurt those killers, and those killers already kind of struggle, so we'll have to see on that. And another thing is people might start running this perk just to bring the killer to their teammates to get them off of them. And that is something that I think we need to be concerned about. But other than that, I think it's an interesting change. It's an ambitious change. And that I would rather take an unbalanced but ambitious change over a boring change that doesn't really fix the problem. If they change a perk and they don't see anything happen to its use rate and win rate, they might just write off the perk as faulty and they won't change it again. We've seen that time and time again. But when they do a massive rework to a perk and it goes one way or another, they're more inclined to mess with it more. I mean, think about like Skull Merchant, how many reworks they have, whereas other killers that get minor tweaks that don't really affect the killer at all, they don't touch them again. You know, even if that killer still desperately needs love. So I'd much rather see these kind of ambitious changes going on. That being said, they might have gotten a bit too ambitious with the the poor Skull Merchant change. I hate Skull Merchant, but this felt like an execution. I think Pixel Bush said that it was just a public execution, and I kind of agree. Anyways, I'm not going to talk about the rest of the changes, because let's face it, we're all here to know how this affects Unknown, and I've covered everything that I think is really important to Unknown. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of other good changes in this patch, but most of them just don't affect Jerry much. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have I missed something? Have I overlooked something? And am I going crazy about something and something not going to be as good as I think it is? Let me know in the comments. But anyways, with all that said, happy hunting.